Good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming in a wet, rainy day like this. This is an exciting event for us. Not only are we talking about Black History Month, but we're also talking about the intersectionality of being Muslim and also being African American. We're going to start the program this morning. First of all, I'm Asher from Unite. Unite on campus is part of the Center of Leadership and Development. And what we do is a lot of programming on this campus that has to do with awareness and critical consciousness. So without further ado, what I'd like to do is introduce Adrienne Jasper. She's a local poet here in Sacramento. Her poetry speaks specifically to this event because she is an African American woman, a woman of color, who is also an activist, who's a songwriter, and who would like to share her poetry with us to start our event off. Adrienne?
Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me. The poem that I'm going to read today is from a book that I wrote titled Lady Muslim with a Pen, Poetry and Essays. And this is it. And this particular poem I wrote after I read a book titled Servants to Allah, African Muslims Enslaved in the Americas. And in that book, it was talking about how Muslims who were enslaved, they couldn't practice their religion openly, so they would wake up in the middle of the night in chains and praying that, their future, because they saw that their religion was dwindling with their offspring. And so they woke up in the middle of the night chained, praying that, Islam would return back to their, generations, further down the road. And now here we are, African American Muslims, in answer to that prayer. So that just struck me. So I wrote this poem, in honor of those Muslims enslaved in America who made those prayers on behalf of future progeny, which is me. So this piece is titled Muslim Slave Prayer. Rising by night in moonlight in chains, with pains deeper than whips ever claimed, enslaved physically, maimed and shamed, but oppression of God is the ultimate slave chain. Death of Islam through forced Christianity, they prayed to Allah for their future progeny, through darkest of nights, through hottest of fires, through sickest of crimes that man could descend to, stripped of humanity, souls in calamity, yet they rose by moonlight to pray for me, praying that through time, Islam would find their African descendants, returning their religion. Now here we stand, African American Muslims in this land, Qurans in our hands, prayers of Muslims enslaved, cooling like trees bring shade, all praise to his name. African American Muslims in this land, derived from heinous pits and designs. African American Muslims in this land, we find peace in spite of all crimes. Muslims in America, holding a torch that shines, showing the world how to thrive. African American Muslims branded through time with prayers of Muslim descendants inside. Thank you.
Thank you, that was beautiful. Oh, is this working? Hello, hello. I like it. See, I thought I was going to have to use my teacher voice, but I guess I can keep it neutral. How are we doing? Okay? All right, good. So, again, how about one more round of applause for her? That was beautiful. Thank you. It's a beautiful clearing of the space. I appreciate that. So, my name is Bill Zanganelester. I'm a professor here in our humanities department. Our humanities department offers classes like world religions, right? Hebrew Bible, New Testament. We study all the different religions from an academic lens. And so I'm the person that kind of works on that here. I'll tell you a little bit about how I got started on that, say a few words about why it's important to hear so many different perspectives, so many different voices. Then we'll move into the panel and hear from our wonderful speakers today. And I guess just thanks again for coming. So, once upon a time, when I was a student at Sierra College. And I was a student at Sierra College around the time of 9/11. And because I went to community college is why I wanted to teach at community college. I've been to a lot of schools since then, right? And the best teachers, including classes at Cal and all through my PhD program, my best teachers I ever had were at community college. Why? Because of things like this, right? Where we have small groups of people, we're able to have conversations face to face. I've had to take someone to a UC class, he does all the talking. I found out that the TAs do that because I signed up to be a TA and I didn't think I had to do that. And the professor told me, okay, you're teaching the class next week. Enjoy, right? So I found out the hard way. But we don't have these, right? So I was taking this class at Sierra College, and it was with a professor I'd had several classes with, and he was Iranian. And I really liked his classes. This particular one happened to be critical thinking. And the week after 9/11 happened, students in class began to harass him, right? And said, oh, you're Muslim? Are you friends with Osama bin Laden? You need to go back to your country. And they're saying that, students were saying that to the professor, right? So of course I'm there as a student, and I got very upset because I liked this professor. I thought he was really good. And instead of being angry, which I don't know, someone was telling me to go somewhere, I would probably have like, no, you get out of my classroom, right? That would be the way that I would do. But instead of doing that, he invited everyone over to his house for dinner. And he had, this is special circumstances, normally presidents don't do that, right? But he had his sister and his parents and his grandparents and his kids were all there, and they all laid out traditional Persian food, played traditional Persian instruments, sang from the Quran, right? It was a beautiful night. The food was amazing. I'd never had like really good kebabs before, right? So I found out the power of good kebabs. There's grilling involved. I think that was my connection because I do like a good grill, right? So I was like, this is like grilling, but even better. So that next Monday, we all came to class, and we're like, how come that night was so beautiful, but what we hear on the news is such a different way, right? I can say this, at the time I didn't know a lot about Islam, as many Americans didn't know a lot about Islam at that time. A lot of people did, right? But a lot of people didn't. And so we began the rest of that semester to have these kinds of conversations, right? About why we're seeing one thing and why we're hearing another thing and how all of this fits together, right? So what I realized is that I didn't know a lot about in this huge movement. And so I became very interested in studying different traditions, different cultures, different religions, right? So I went on my PhDs at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, right? It's in philosophy. And I really fell in love with exploring all these different traditions. And one of the reasons why, I don't know if people will be surprised to hear this or not, but did you know that we are one of the most religiously diverse countries in the world? Would you be surprised about that? How many people feel like, yeah, I feel like that's the case? Okay, how many people are like, what? Okay, we feel like that's the case because we're in Sacramento, right? Because we're in Sacramento. There's not a lot of places in the world in the country where you could go where you feel like this, but you can in Sacramento. There's very specific reasons for that. We have in the country one of the largest Afghani populations in the country is in Sacramento, right? We also have significant Russian-Ukrainian populations, and then that awesome California mix of everything else, right? Up in Yuba City, a little bit north, we have the largest Sikh population in the country is in Yuba City, right? So around this time of 9/11, a lot of my Sikh friends, they put up flags in solidarity, right, to show solidarity for what had happened. And their neighbors in Yuba City began to throw bricks through all the Sikh houses, through the windows, and set the actual flags that they had set out on fire, right? And so were expressing a lot of anger towards these Sikh families, right? Why? Because they thought that they had something to do with Islam, first of all, and then second, they thought Islam had something to do with what had happened, right? And this made me very upset, and made me realize how complex our world is, but how unequipped so many of us are to understand a religiously complex world, right? So many times when we talk about religion, we talk about it in the context of whether you love it or whether you hate it, whether you're supporting your side or not supporting someone else's side. However, the problem with that is that it leaves out something very important. So there's a very old story that I want to kind of briefly share. And this story comes from the Jain tradition. It's kind of a metaphor for why I think it's important to understand how complex and religiously plural our country is. Whether you love religion or whether you're allergic to religion, my argument in my classrooms and here is that we need to know far more about people with whom we share a world, but not a worldview, right? I'm not here to argue that religion is good or religion is bad, right? Too often we see the symbols of any religion used for hate, right? Ku Klux Klan, for example, justifies everything they do using scripture. Most people would say that not very Christian, right? But too often we see that. So it's not about whether it's good or bad, but understanding that these traditions have been in place for a long time, and they're not going anywhere. So it's kind of like having to go to dinner with a family, right? Inevitably, there's going to be someone there that you don't necessarily agree with, it's the eye to eye on, but you still have to sit at the table. Okay, so back to the story. Briefly. It comes from the Jain tradition. Jain tradition is a very old religious tradition. Okay? Once upon a time, there was 3 men sitting at a bar, and they heard that there was going to be this elephant coming to town. Now, none of these 3 men had ever seen an elephant before, right? So they started having arguments. Hey, what is this? What is an elephant? And one person says, oh, I know what an elephant is. It's small and squeaky and likes cheese, right? And the other guy's, no. I heard an elephant, it has a huge wingspan and flies around and breathes fire, right? And they said, no, that's not an elephant, right? So clearly they had no idea what an elephant was, right? So they're arguing. And they say, well, the circus is coming to town. They're bringing an elephant with them. We get to finally go see what it is. So the elephant comes. Unfortunately, they don't have enough money to get into the show. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to wait till night and we're going to sneak into the tent, right? And then we'll find out what the elephant is. So they do that, right? Night falls. Their feet are crunching through gravel. Their breath fogging out. They go into the tent at night. Make sure no one's around. Into the tent. Of course, inside the tent at night, what can you see? Not a lot. So they begin feeling around, right? One person grabs onto the elephant's leg, feels that leg, right, and says, I've discovered, I found the elephant, right? It's here, and it's kind of what? Rough, hairy, round, cylindrical. I think an elephant is a tree. An elephant must be a tree, right? Meanwhile, someone else, stumbling in the dark, grabs onto the elephant's tusk, right, and says, a tree. This doesn't feel like any tree I've ever felt. This feels more like soft, smooth, maybe like a mineral. Check it out. An elephant isn't even an animal, it's just a mineral. Meanwhile, the third person, walking around, stumbling in the dark, grabs onto the tail and says, tree? No. Mineral? No. An elephant is clearly a snake. What are you guys talking about? How much did you have to drink before we got here? Right? So they all 3 start arguing about who has truly comprehended the true nature of the elephant, right? The elephant, of course, wakes up. They run away, all the time arguing about who had correctly apprehended the true nature of the elephant. Right? End of story. Right? It's a very traditional story, and it points to a particular problem, particular challenge that we have as human beings. Right? The reason that each one of those 3 people thought that they were right is because they had experienced it. You can't tell the person who has their arm around that leg that it's not like a tree because they're feeling it in that moment and it is like a tree. And you can't tell the person who's saying it's a mineral that it's not like a mineral because it's in their hand, right? Does that make sense? It's in their hand. You can't say it's not like a mineral. I'm holding it right now, right? So of course it is. So the problem is not with their assessment of the elephant, but where do they go wrong? Well, where they go wrong is in their inability to see what the other individuals are seeing. They're assuming that the piece of the puzzle that they have is in fact the entire puzzle itself, right? Which raises a very important question. How do you know whether or not you have a piece of the puzzle of truth or the whole puzzle itself? How can you know that? Of course, the only way to know that is if you can see the whole puzzle or the whole elephant. In this case, the elephant, for the Jains, it could represent many things, right? The Jains used it to represent divinity, to represent God, right? God is a thing that is very big. It's hard. How can you see all of God, for example, right? This is what the Jains would ask. You can't. You can only see bits and pieces. So then we conflate the pieces with the whole thing, right? This elephant comes in many different forms and sizes today, right? What does an American look like? What does it mean to be an American? Who has it right when it comes to being American? Does an American look like me, or you, or you, or you, or you, or you? Who is an American? American is all about it. There's many different pieces to that puzzle. Does that make sense? Similarly, religions themselves are very complex. There's a tendency to want to make them a monolith. A monolith is when we say all of religion is one thing, right? In grad school, you call that essentializing. When you essentialize about a religious tradition, you boil it down to a few simple ideas and say, well, all Christians do one thing, all Muslims do another thing, and all Jews do another thing, right? The problem with that is that it's not true, right? It's much more complex. There's many different pieces that everyone's holding on to, right? And all of those pieces together make the whole picture. So what we're doing today, right? What we're doing today is we're trying to not essentialize about Islam. Too often in the media, we paint a very broad brush with Islam, right? We say, oh, all Muslims, they're from the Middle East, or Arabic, right? Guess what percentage of global Muslims are actually Arab? Somewhere, depending on when you got your stats and all that, stats are always problematic, but 13 to 15% Arab, which means that the majority of global Muslims are non-Arab, right? Now, I say that not because one is right and one is wrong, but to point out the ideas we have about Islam are often painted with too broad a brush, right? Fun fact, where most Muslims are is in per capita, Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Malaysia, right? Does that mean that's the best version of Islam? Of course not, right? We're just talking about populations. So the reason I point that out is so that today we can start to get a more nuanced understanding, right? What it means to be American, what it means to be Californian, what it means to be a student or a teacher is a very complex thing, right? Similarly, what it means to be Muslim depends on which community you grew up in, what your story was, how you came to Islam, right? Where you grew up, how your country, how your neighborhood, how your community, how it practices it. By understanding how diverse and how unique all these different iterations are of Islam, we can begin to have a better picture of what Islam is really like, instead of these very sloppy narratives that make absolutely no sense and tend to justify just all the wrong ideas. Right? So that's what we're here to do today. When we hear these speakers today, we're hearing about a genuine experience of a particular form of Islam. Right? Is Islam only the 4 speakers that we're going to hear today? No, absolutely not. Islam is a huge tradition. It's like that elephant, right? Eminent Muslim scholar Sayyid Nasser says that Islam is a house with many different windows, right? So we're peeking into many different windows. He later corrected that statement and said, Islam is that house, but the house, there's no walls, right? It's all of existence is the house of Islam from his perspective. So there's only windows to look at. There's no even house, right? This is a different way to think about that. But the point is, we're looking at a lot of different ones now. Don't think that this, if you have a different practice of Islam, right, then that's, of course you do. Because Islam is a big tradition. You can't essentialize it, boil it down to one thing. So what we ask today, hear everyone out, hear some particular experience of Islam, know that there are more, and that doesn't mean that one is better and one is worse, one is more right or not right. That's not the point. What we are here to do today is try to understand the complexity of the world that we live in, and in that way, try to get along as a community a little better than we have been, okay? So with that in mind, I'd like to invite all of our panelists to come on up and invite you in the spirit of conversation and investigation to begin this talk. Thank you.